I didn't start talking to Doug until he was divorced. Should a married woman be talking to a married man for an hour or two or an hour a day or 3 or 4 times a week in the premise of, oh, they're helping me or counseling me?
They're my mentor.
Is that ever appropriate?
I think it's very dangerous.
Well, divorce it's a no-win for anybody. That's why God doesn't like it.
Joni Lamb and Dr. Doug Weiss. 2 names that have been showing up together a lot more lately, and not just because of church events or ministry conferences. Their relationship has turned into one of the most talked about topics in Christian media. And honestly, once you hear the details, it's easy to see why.
Absolutely. The emotional connection, unless this is a professional therapist and they are paid to give you this kind of support,
Right.
You're kidding yourself. You're kidding yourself.
Dangerous. That is very dangerous. And those are the kinds of conversations. Workplace spouse is a big issue now. It is, because that's a safe relationship, because you know the person, you know that they're stable, they got a job. But once you stop talking about work, you start saying, so how things going? Oh, that's nice shoes you have on there.
Right,
Just compliments.
That's a nice dress.
If you haven't gotten complimented at home, and you have a colleague that always compliments you.
Yeah, and your words of affirmation.
Yeah.
So it plays right into your love tank, like the Bible.
Would you say that grounds for divorce was present in this situation for Doug to leave and marry Joni?
My goodness. Well, that's a direct question, isn't it?
I want to use wisdom, and I'd like for you to come and help, us walk through this relationship. And so they all said, well, we need to meet him and talk to him and find out what his story. And so they did. And they all came back and said, we understand his situation, and we believe there is a biblical reason. And we're good with you starting the dating process, but just kind of slow it down.
Let's go back to the beginning, or at least the beginning of what the public knows. In November 2021, Joni's husband, Marcus Lamb, passed away.
This morning at 4 a.m., the president and founder of Daystar and the love of my life went to be with Jesus.
His death wasn't just a huge personal loss. It shook Daystar, the entire Christian broadcasting world, and anyone who followed their ministry. Marcus wasn't just her husband. He was her co-host, her ministry partner, and half of the face of Daystar. Losing him left a massive hole in her life, and people naturally expected a long season of grieving, healing, and quiet. But things moved in a very different direction. Not long after Marcus died, Joni began spending a lot of time with Dr. Doug Weiss, a marriage therapist with a big platform of his own. And at the time, Doug was still married to his wife, Lisa Weiss. That's when people started asking serious questions. Was this just a friendship that grew during Joni's time of grief? Or had something been going on even earlier? Because here's what made people stop in their tracks. Joni admitted that on the same night Marcus died, she was on the phone with Doug for 19 hours straight. Let that sink in. The night her husband passed, she wasn't surrounded by family or alone in prayer. She was talking to another man all night long. And not just any man, a married one. People who heard that started wondering, how long had this connection really been there? And if it wasn't romantic at first, how did it get so deep so fast? Now, let's talk about Doug's side of the story. When the divorce news broke, Doug said it was Lisa who walked away, that she abandoned him. But over time, that version of events started to look a little shaky. Some sources close to Lisa say she didn't want the marriage to end. In fact, she reportedly wanted to reconcile. But Doug, he moved on, fast. And some folks believe Joni may have been part of the reason. That's where this whole story takes a twist. Because if Doug was leaning on Joni during his marriage problems, and Joni was leaning on Doug while grieving Marcus, then maybe their connection wasn't just emotional support. It could have been something more. The timing feels off. And when public figures, especially ones who preach about faith, purity, and doing things God's way, make decisions that feel messy or rushed, people are going to pay attention. And then there's Doug's comment, probably one of the weirdest parts of this entire story. He said that he was the first one to see Marcus's body when the casket was opened. That's not something you usually hear from someone who wasn't family. Most people would expect that kind of moment to be deeply private, reserved for loved ones. So why was Doug, of all people, there? That one sentence added fuel to the fire. It left people wondering. Was he already that close to Joni by then? Was this more than just friendship or ministry partnership? Because from the outside, it looked like Doug had stepped right into Marcus's place. Co-hosting shows, joining the family business, and even making sarcastic comments about Marcus's past. It didn't come across as humble or respectful. It came off cold, even harsh. And with all this happening so soon after Marcus's death, many people began to feel uncomfortable, not just because of the romance, but because of what it represented. A blurred line between grief and new love, a rushed transition, and maybe, just maybe, a relationship that began long before it ever went public. People expected Joni to mourn, to step back, to reflect on everything she and Marcus had built. But instead, she moved forward, fast, with a man who had his own complicated history. And that speed, that closeness, that 19-hour phone call on the night her husband died, it left a lot of people asking questions. Some are still waiting for honest answers.
I was the first one there when they opened the casket before anyone was even there. You know, and I find that ironic, you know, because I loved Marcus. Sure. You know, I love him as a man and what he's built and who he is, his kids, his family. I've loved him for years.
It's hard not to raise an eyebrow when you start lining up all the pieces of the story. On the surface, it might look like a grieving widow found comfort in a trusted friend. But the deeper you go, the more things stop adding up. People aren't just whispering about Joni Lamb and Doug Weiss anymore. They're asking serious questions. Let's start with the basics. We already know that Doug wasn't just some guy Joni met after Marcus passed. He was around long before that. He was connected not only to Joni, but to the entire Lamb family. He wasn't just a guest speaker or a distant colleague. He was close. And now, looking back, some folks are wondering just how close. One of the biggest red flags came during Marcus Lamb's funeral. And it wasn't just the usual awkward tension that can come with public grief. It was Doug's behavior. See, Doug wasn't just there to comfort the family. He was involved in ways that raised some eyebrows. Word got out that he was so concerned about the burial that he stepped outside the family's wishes to personally make sure Marcus's real body was inside the casket before it was buried. Now, depending on how you look at that, it could seem like a caring gesture. But to many people watching from the outside, it felt strange, like he had some deeper reason for needing that kind of reassurance. Why was he so involved? Why did he take on a role that wasn't his to take? He wasn't family, not by blood and not by marriage. Not yet. So why did he feel the need to oversee something so intimate, so final? And that's where the whispers began to shift into full-blown suspicion. Some people started asking, was there more going on between Joni and Doug before Marcus passed away? The timing just didn't sit right. The closeness. The 19-hour phone called the night Marcus died. The way Doug inserted himself into private family matters. It led to a question that many are too afraid to say out loud. Should Marcus's death be looked at again? Could there be more to the story than we've been told? Now, let's be clear, there's no official investigation, no charges, but that hasn't stopped people from wondering. And when a story already feels messy, unaddressed questions only make it worse. Fast forward to April 2022. Doug Weiss appears on Daystar's show, Ministry Now. He's sitting under bright studio lights, talking about family and faith, and still wearing his wedding ring. That might not seem strange at first, until you realize that Doug had already filed for divorce from his wife, Lisa, 3 months earlier in January 2022. Yet here he was, talking on national television like his marriage was still intact. If that wasn't confusing enough, things took another turn just 2 months later. In June 2022, Doug and Joni officially became a couple. But this directly clashes with what Joni said in the past. According to her, she and Doug didn't have any kind of relationship until after his divorce was finalized in May. But the timeline doesn't lie. If Doug was still on TV pretending to be married in April, and with Joni in June, something doesn't add up. Either their story was rushed, or someone's bending the truth. And then came the moment that left a lot of people stunned. Joni took to the air and passionately defended Doug's choice to leave his wife. But she didn't just speak in general terms. She read a statement from Doug that painted a really painful picture of his marriage to Lisa. In it, Doug blamed Lisa for being emotionally distant. He said she suffered from intimacy anorexia, a term Doug himself created and popularized. He claimed Lisa never had time for him, that she pushed him away, and that he had spent years feeling neglected. Joni didn't just read the statement. She doubled down on it. She said Doug had been through enough, that his marriage was no longer honoring God. That staying with someone who withholds love and affection isn't holy, it's harmful. And with that, she fully stood by Doug's decision to walk away from a marriage of over 30 years. But that raises a big question. Was everything Doug said about Lisa the full story? Or was it a way to justify a new relationship that was already in motion? Because let's be honest, when a man moves on that quickly, while still appearing on TV with his wedding ring, and then blames his wife for all the problems, it starts to feel one-sided. Lisa hasn't said much publicly, which only makes people wonder more. Maybe she's staying silent out of pain. Or maybe she just doesn't want to fuel the media fire. But her silence has left Doug's voice as the only version of their marriage the public has heard. And some think that version sounds a little too polished, too convenient. And this isn't just a random celebrity drama. These are leaders in Christian media. People who built platforms by teaching others about faithfulness, marriage, and integrity. That's what makes all of this hit harder. Because when the people who preach about doing the right thing start living in a way that feels messy and unclear, the people watching don't just lose trust, they start to feel betrayed. There's no denying that grief can break a person. And maybe Joni really was searching for comfort. Maybe Doug really felt stuck in a marriage that had worn him down. But when you put the pieces together, the late-night phone calls, the funeral involvement, the wedding ring appearances, the new romance right on the heels of a divorce, it's hard to ignore the bigger question. What's really going on here? Because behind every headline, behind every public statement, there's usually more to the story. And the more we learn, the harder it is to tell where the truth ends and the cover-up begins.
What? Affection?
Spiritual, emotional, praise, nurturing, all of that stuff.
So can you break it down for us? Like, did she just ignore you, not talk to you?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I was just trying to understand.
Coming home and being ignored for 3-4 hours a night. Why she would be on the phone or
Joni has read things to me, so I remember that, and it was horrible. It sounded like a black hole. Like I had empathy.
If you really want to know,
well, no, I don't want to.
Hours if you really want to know.
Not really.
I read some.
We're good. We didn't want to focus on. We wanted more talk to Joni.
But you were asking why.
I believe you, and even if it looks like I have no empathy.
Let me give you details. So this is in the book.
I didn't want the details. I don't want the details. I want to move on to the next point.
This was intricacies.
No, Jonathan did.
That's all right. We don't have to go into the details.
No, I'm just going to read a couple of these. We opened it up, so let's do it. Before kids, she was busy at work or with exercising, and she became busy with the kids. She's busy on vacation, busy on her phone, busy reading. Basically, I've heard I'm busy my entire marriage. I think the painful part for me began after I came to know what intimacy anorexia is. My wife too knows what her sickness is and how to cure it. However, she refuses. Her refusal shows that her behavior is truly intentional. That makes living with her hard and more painful. She could choose to be more kind and affectionate, but she chooses to remain harsh and critical. I mean, there's a bunch more. That was his.
It is intentional.
When you start putting all the pieces of the situation side by side, something just doesn't feel right. At first glance, it kind of looks like a story we've all heard before. A woman loses her husband and finds comfort in someone who understands her pain. But when you look a little closer, this story gets a whole lot messier. We're talking about Joni Lamb, the co-founder of Daystar Television, and Doug Weiss, a well-known marriage therapist. And at this point, people aren't just curious. They're starting to ask real questions. Let's go back for a second and look at how it all started. Doug wasn't some stranger who suddenly showed up after Marcus Lamb, Joni's husband, passed away. No, he was already connected to the family. Deeply, he wasn't just a guest on their show or someone they brought in for advice. He had a bond with Joni and with the whole Lamb family. He was there, present, familiar. And now, when people look back, they're wondering how deep that connection really went. Was it just a friendship? Or was it something more? One of the biggest moments that made people stop and say, wait, what? Happened during Marcus's funeral. Now, funerals are always emotional and tense, especially for public figures. But Doug didn't just attend. He got really involved. Word started to spread that Doug was so concerned about how Marcus was being buried that he went out of his way to personally check that Marcus's actual body was in the casket before it was lowered into the ground. Think about that for a second. That's a pretty personal thing to do, especially for someone who wasn't officially part of the family. At least, not yet. Some people saw it as a caring gesture, but others, they found it odd, like too involved. Why would he need to do that? Why step over the family's boundaries to confirm something so intimate and sensitive? It made people wonder what was really going on in Doug's head. What gave him the right to take charge like that? Was it just about grief? Or was there something more beneath the surface? That's when the quiet whispers turned into full-blown suspicion. People started piecing things together. The way Doug was always around, the emotional bond he had with Joni, and that now infamous 19-hour phone call on the night Marcus died. Yes, 19 hours. That's not a casual check-in call. That's deep, emotional, and intense. And it got people asking the question they've been holding back. Could there have been something going on between Joni and Doug before Marcus passed away? No one's officially said that. There's no legal investigation. No police reports. But that hasn't stopped the rumors. And honestly, with all the weird timing, it's easy to see why people are skeptical. Because when you're dealing with people in the public eye, especially Christian leaders who teach about marriage and loyalty, people expect transparency. And this has been anything but clear. Now let's jump ahead to April 2022. Doug appears on Ministry Now, the same Daystar show Joni co-hosts. He's on camera, under the lights, talking about his faith, his family. And here's the strange part. He's still wearing his wedding ring. That might not seem like a big deal at first. But here's where it gets messy. Doug had already filed for divorce from his wife, Lisa, 3 months earlier. That was back in January 2022. So why is he on national television in April, acting like nothing's changed? And then just 2 months later, in June, Doug and Joni are officially a couple. Just like that. But hold on a second. Joni has said, more than once, that she and Doug didn't start anything until after his divorce was finalized in May. That doesn't line up at all. If they became a couple in June, and he was still publicly acting like a married man in April, what exactly happened in between? Someone's timeline isn't matching up. Either this all moved way too fast, or someone's not being totally honest. Things got even more uncomfortable when Joni went on air and fiercely defended Doug's decision to leave his wife. She didn't just say, "Hey, it didn't work out." She read a statement from Doug, a deeply personal one, about his marriage with Lisa. In it, Doug accused Lisa of being emotionally unavailable. He said she suffered from something called intimacy anorexia, a term Doug himself came up with and often speaks about in his therapy work. He painted a picture of a marriage where he felt alone, unloved, and unwanted. According to him, Lisa constantly pushed him away and left him feeling rejected. But Joni didn't stop there. She added her own thoughts, saying Doug had already been through enough, that he had suffered long enough. She even went as far as saying that staying in a marriage like that, where one person withholds love and affection, isn't what God wants. She claimed it was time for Doug to walk away, and that his decision was not only valid, but righteous. Now, let's pause for a second. What if everything Doug said about his marriage is true? What if Lisa really did shut down emotionally, and he was left struggling alone for years? If that's the case, then yes, it would be heartbreaking. No one deserves to feel unloved. But here's the issue. Lisa hasn't shared her side. She hasn't come forward to explain what really happened. Maybe it's because she's hurt. Maybe she doesn't want to add more drama. Or maybe she's just trying to protect her peace. But either way, her silence has left the world with only Doug's version of the truth. And some people think his version feels too convenient, too well-timed. And let's be honest, when a man leaves a 30-year marriage, then appears on TV still wearing his ring, only to turn around and start a new relationship almost immediately after, yeah, that raises eyebrows. It doesn't just look messy. It looks planned. And this isn't just any couple we're talking about. These are leaders, Christian public figures, people who spent years teaching about loyalty, honesty, commitment, and staying true to God's word. That's what makes the situation even harder for a lot of people to process. Because when those same leaders start living out stories that seem the opposite of what they preach, it shakes people's trust. It makes their followers feel confused, hurt, even betrayed. We all know that grief changes people. It can make you reach for someone who feels safe. It can make you move faster than you normally would. And maybe that's what happened with Joni. Maybe she was heartbroken and needed someone. And maybe Doug was that someone. After feeling unloved for so long, he found someone who understood him. But when you put all the facts together, the deep connection before Marcus died, the 19-hour phone call, the odd funeral behavior, the wedding ring on live TV, and the fast-moving romance right after 30-year marriage ended, it's hard not to stop and say, what's really going on here? Because with stories like these, there's usually more than what gets posted online or said in a statement. There's always another layer. And sometimes, the more you learn, the more you start to question where the truth ends and where the cover-up begins.